This morning, I stepped over 3 corpses on my way to the spice refinery and barely gave them a second glance. A few years ago, that would have made me vomit, or at least lose my appetite. Now, it's just another day in the lovely paradise that is Tatooine under Hutt rule. I sidestepped a puddle of something. Blood, maybe the remnants of last night's entertainment in the gladiator pits, and kept moving, eyes down. The twin suns were already baking the sand into glass, and the air tasted like sweat mixed with death. Just the normal sights, sounds, and smells of my daily commute through Mos Eisley's slave quarters. You get used to it, I guess. I hardly blink when a distant scream rings out from the direction of Jabba's palace. Someone's having either a really good time or a really bad time. In this world, it's often both at once. I just keep walking. A few other haggard-looking folks shuffle along the street with me, heads down, each lost in their own world of trying not to attract attention. Once in a while, I catch myself marveling at how normal all this has become. Then I remember it wasn't always like this. Not so long ago, life here was different. Not exactly good, mind you. Tatooine has never been kind, but different. I grew up when this region was still independent, back before the Hutts consolidated their grip. It feels like a lifetime ago. Republic-aligned, dusty, and brutally indifferent. That was the world of my childhood. We toiled for moisture farmers day in and day out. Every morning I'd wake to the sound of vaporators humming their monotonous song. My parents would make me recite the local prayers to whatever deity still listened in this forsaken desert. May the Force deliver us from thirst, deliver us from the crate dragons, that sort of thing. I mouthed the words dutifully back then, never imagining I'd one day be muttering them under my breath in the literal heart of Hutt depravity. Back then, the biggest worries were making our water quotas and avoiding the Tusken Raiders' territories. My family was low class, ordinary moisture farmers scratching out a living. We worked the vaporators or the cantina depending on the season, and we paid our taxes to whatever local warlord claimed the territory that week. I remember complaining about how bland our Nerf jerky rations were and how strict the curfew was at night. Funny, in hindsight, those are such petty concerns. Little me thought the moisture barons were oppressive. The endless work shifts, the boring routine, the constant reminders that we were one misstep away from being sold to slavers. And it was oppressive, just in a very mundane, predictable way. But it was safe, at least compared to now. No Gamorrean guards dragging people out of their beds at midnight. No neighbors disappearing into the rancor pit overnight. If you died violently back then, it was probably due to a sandstorm or a Tusken ambush, not because you literally exploded from spice overdose at a Hutt pleasure barge. I never imagined our dusty little settlement would become what it is today. But looking back, there were signs. Whispers of Hutt expansion into the western Dune Sea. Graffiti of slug-like symbols and Hutties' curses started appearing on cantina walls. I was a teenager when the rumors really took hold. Stories of crime lords holding secret auctions where anything, and anyone, was for sale. Of people disappearing into the night, supposedly shipped off-world as merchandise. At the time, I brushed it off. If the Republic hadn't shown up, it couldn't be that serious, right? Innocent ignorance. The turning point came quick and hit hard. One day, I was at work calibrating moisture evaporators when the settlement's comm speakers suddenly fell silent mid-announcement. Then came music. Not the cantina band kind, but something else entirely. Hypnotic drums, a wicked melody that made my skin crawl through the heat. Chaos erupted, literally and figuratively, that day. Our settlement elder, a Rhodian whose name I've since tried to forget, appeared on the central holoprojector dressed not in his usual dusty robes, but in flowing purple silks, eyes glazed. He declared our settlement's new management, in the name of Jabba the Hutt, the almighty crime lord of Tatooine. Just like that, independence was out, and this new nightmare was in. Half the population was too stunned to react. The other half, well, they rejoiced. Turns out the Hutt syndicates had been busy. Workers around me dropped their tools and started cheering this madness. Some tore off their moisture farmer badges right then and there. painting Hutti's symbols on their chests in machine oil and sand. I remember seeing one of my shiftmates, a quiet Twi'lek girl who used to lead our evening prayers, laughing as she smeared a slug insignia across her forehead. It was like a switch flipped in people's minds. Hutt enforcers, Weekay mercenaries and Nikto thugs who had secretly infiltrated our settlement, flooded the streets. I heard blaster fire, screams. The local security post was set ablaze by midday. So much for law and order. Those few brave souls fought to the last, but they were torn apart by mobs of frenzied collaborators and something even worse. That's when I saw my first rancor in action. It lumbered out of a sand crawler on clawed feet, a massive brown shape with too many teeth and a horrifyingly powerful jaw. It moved through the panicking crowd like a predator through prey, crushing anyone who still wore Republic symbols or offered resistance. I'll never forget the sight of our settlement guard captain, armored and armed, dropping to his knees in delirious terror as that beast lifted him by the head and bit down, the crunch echoing across the plaza. By nightfall, the settlement was firmly in the grip of Jabba's network. The moisture-barren families threw open their vaults to the victorious gangsters and whatever foul allies they had. An enormous hologram of Jabba, the twin-tailed slug symbol, was projected right over the old Republic garrison where the Senate seal once hung. I stumbled home in shock, stepping over bodies littering the streets. That part hasn't changed much, I suppose. My parents, they didn't make it. Later, I heard a lot of the resistant folk were rounded up that first day as examples. I try not to dwell on how exactly they died. I spent that first night curled in our moisture cellar, clutching my grandfather's beat-up Republic service medal and shaking like a leaf. The Republic didn't feel very present that night, or any night since. That all happened around 10 standard years ago, though it's hard to keep track of time precisely these days. Since then, my world has been entirely transformed, inside and out. Now, daily life is a twisted parody of what it once was. The settlement didn't burn down or fall into complete anarchy after the takeover. Not completely. In fact, it almost runs functionally, which is the sickest joke of all. We still have a society of sorts, just one dedicated to the Hutt Cartel. People go to work, produce goods, eat when there's food, sleep when they're allowed, and try not to get killed, just like under the moisture barons. The difference is all in the how and why. Take the upper crust, the palace elite. They used to hide their vices behind closed doors and respectable facades. Now they flaunt it. The crime lords and their favored lieutenants, those that survived the transition, immediately swore loyalty to Jabba. Many had done so in secret already. These days, the lords of the palace live in a perpetual orgy of luxury and cruelty. They renamed themselves with absurd titles like Bib Fortuna, Master of the Court, and Ula, Jewel of the Throne Room. I'm not making that up. I once had to do a repair job in the palace's cooling systems and caught a glimpse of their high life. Silk curtains billowing in halls painted with psychedelic murals of Hutt glory. Servants, slaves really, scurrying around with platters of death sticks and spiked Gardula wine. And the screams, some of pleasure, some of agony. Not that the nobles bother distinguishing. They consider both equally entertaining. The nobility here doesn't bother with subtlety anymore. They'll parade down into the settlement streets whenever they feel like it, decked in their elaborate costumes and grotesque jewelry, plucking random citizens for their amusement. If a crime lord's eye falls on you, force help you, not that it will. Best case, you end up forced to attend one of their pleasure barges as the evening's plaything. Worst case, you're fed to the rancor as dinner theater. Then there are the majordomo priests, the new holy or unholy men and women. Under the Republic, we had protocol droids preaching civic duty. Now we have Hutt courtiers peddling Jabba's gospel of indulgence and submission. They roam the settlement in sensory overload processions, brightly colored robes that barely cover their scarred or tattooed flesh, ringing bells and playing strange instruments to lure people to worship. Every few days there's some kind of public spectacle. Executions, gladiator fights, forced performances. We're all expected to attend or at least pretend to enjoy. I often see the high majordomo of our district, a human who used to be a respectable merchant before he found Jabba, standing atop a hover platform in the square, delivering frenzied sermons about embracing every sensation, every desire. He's usually flanked by a pair of Twi'lek dancers kept as his personal attendants. Imagine your local official accompanied by actual slaves draped over him like accessories. It certainly keeps the crowd attentive. Missing these ceremonies is not an option. If you're absent or even look bored, the enforcers might drag you onto the stage as a volunteer for the next demonstration. I've seen what those demonstrations entail. No thank you. I clap and cheer with the rest, even as my stomach turns. So how does a regular person like me survive all this? By adapting fast. In the immediate aftermath of the takeover, I was honestly ready to die. Between losing my family and witnessing everything I ever believed in get trampled, I wasn't sure I wanted to go on. But self-preservation is a funny thing. After the initial shock, some quiet instinct kicked in and said, live. Even if the life is hell. Even if each day makes you question your sanity. Survive first. Despair later. The first step was blending in. I learned very quickly that overt resistance was suicide. I saw what happened to the Republic loyalists who tried to fight. Or even speak up. Public execution if they were lucky. Rancor pit if they weren't. I had no desire to join the Martyr of the Week club, so I did what I had to. I scraped off my Republic insignia with a rusty blade. That was a fun evening. I burned my collection of Senate propaganda hollows and hid any evidence of my former allegiances. It felt like betraying everything I once stood for. And maybe it was, but it kept me alive. The next step. Figure out the new rules and play along just enough to avoid notice. That meant attending the Hutt gatherings, at least in body. It meant wearing a small Huttist pendant around my neck that I looted off a dead collaborator. Better to have some token of devotion to Flash if questioned. It meant forcing myself to cheer at the blood sports in the arena, to applaud at the end of an especially graphic feeding, to say, "Glory to Jabba the Magnificent," with as much fake enthusiasm as I could muster when the overseers passed by. In the beginning, I was terrified my facade would crack, that they'd see the disgust or fear in my eyes. But people tend to see what they want to see. If you clap and smile and don't cause trouble, you become part of the furniture, and being part of the furniture is a good thing. Furniture doesn't get singled out for punishment or special honors. Furniture survives. Mentally, I had to adjust too. It's amazing what the human mind can get used to given time. At first, I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat. My nerves were shot. But you can't live on adrenaline and fear forever. Eventually, exhaustion wins. I found strange ways to cope. One was focusing on small routines, something as simple as tidying my hab unit corner or doing my maintenance tasks meticulously. In a world gone mad, fixing a broken vaporator or sorting spice shipments gave me a tiny sense of normalcy. Another coping mechanism, you might have noticed, is dark humor. When everything is so utterly insane and horrifying, sometimes the only way to process it is to laugh quietly to yourself at the absurdity. I make snarky little observations in my head about the crazy stuff I see, like I'm a spectator in a really twisted holovid drama. It's either laugh internally or break down sobbing, and the latter would get me killed. Or worse. So I choose to find the grim irony in things. Like when our new taskmaster at the spice refinery declared, "Productivity is pleasure," and distributed stimulants to keep us working 20-hour shifts. I had to bite my tongue not to giggle at the absurd corporate pep talk vibe of it. Dry sarcasm, even if only in my own mind, keeps me sane. Well, relatively sane. As part of playing along with the new order, I've seen and done things I never thought I would. Some experiences stand out like horrific milestones on my journey through damnation. Let me tell you about one of them. The time I attended the grand festival of the glorious Hutt, our settlement's biggest annual celebration. It was the anniversary of Jabba's consolidation of power, a decade since the day the crime lord flipped the table. To commemorate, the powers that be organized a settlement-wide extravaganza of excess, and attendance was of course mandatory. I dreaded it for weeks leading up. Notices were plastered everywhere. Carnival of delights. All citizens rejoice, or be made to rejoice. Yes, That was the actual slogan. Nice to have a choice, huh? When the day came, the whole settlement was transformed. Garish banners of purple and gold hung from every building. Confetti, made from shredded silk and maybe flakes of dried something, rained from the rooftops. Roving bands of musicians, some human, some definitely not, filled the air with an incessant, feverish rhythm. The normally grimy main thoroughfare was scrubbed and painted with swirling Hutt calligraphy. They had set up a huge central stage in Unity Plaza, ironically named under the Republic, still ironically appropriate now, where the main ceremonies would occur. My work team and I were herded there by mid-morning, all of us given festive masks to wear. Mine was a cheap plasteel thing painted with a leering grin. The idea, I guess, was to make the crowd look gleeful whether we felt it or not. Thousands of people packed the plaza, shoulder to shoulder. Palace nobles in elaborate costumes occupied the best vantage points, lounging on hover platforms above. We regular folk crammed in below, sweating in the twin suns' heat, anxious, and trying to act thrilled. The festival kicked off with Bib Fortuna, Jabba's major domo, making a speech. He stood on the dais resplendent in shimmering robes of purple and gold, Leku twitching as if to embrace us all. His voice was amplified unnaturally, some kind of sonic enhancer. It felt like he was whispering directly into my ears despite being hundreds of feet away. He spoke of how far we'd come, how we were all free now to experience true prosperity under Hutt protection, unshackled from Republic taxation and bureaucracy. The crowd roared on cue, thanks to the enforcers prowling the edges. I clapped my hands and tried to look inspired, though I mostly felt nauseous. Then came the performances, if you can call them that. A procession of what I can only describe as Hutt-sponsored artists took the stage. One group engaged in a sort of choreographed combat dance. Gladiators, probably prisoners or debt slaves, fought with vibroblades and shock staffs while acrobats leaped overhead. The combat was real. Blood sprayed across the sand as limbs were severed artistically to the beat of drums. It was "for the glory of the Hutts," the announcer proclaimed. A living sculpture of savage beauty. I remember my knees nearly buckling at that point. Through my ridiculous grinning mask, I clenched my jaw so hard I thought my teeth would crack.
Next, a cadre of Jabba's personal guard, massively enhanced Klatooinian enforcers in ceremonial armor, made their appearance. There were 4 of them, enormous and grotesque, covered in cybernetic implants and ritualistic scars. They were greeted like celebrity heroes by the crowd. When they started their demonstration, I understood why people whispered about them in terror. They executed captives, probably captured smugglers or rival gang members, with choreographed brutality. Some were fed to trained AKK dogs. Others were immolated with flamethrowers to the rhythm of the music. Some people in the front rows literally fainted from the horror. Those of us farther back could barely process what we were seeing. And yet, the crowd cheered, because better to cheer than to be singled out, right? So I cheered, though it probably came out as a strangled groan. The grand finale of the festival was, unsurprisingly, a mass execution masquerading as celebration. Bib Fortuna announced that Jabba was watching from his palace and that we would now share our ultimate devotion with the almighty Hutt. This was the cue for the enforcers to start grabbing pre-selected individuals from the crowd. Those unlucky souls had probably been marked days prior. About a dozen men and women, various species, were pushed onto the stage. Some were volunteers. You could tell by the fanatical glaze in their eyes, drugged into compliance. But a few were plainly terrified commoners chosen to spice things up. One of them was a young Rhodian from my Hab block, a quiet moisture tech named Tico. I saw his antennae quivering in panic as they dragged him up. He caught my gaze in the sea of masked faces, and I could see he recognized me, silently pleading. There was absolutely nothing I could do. The ritual that followed, I'll spare the worst details. Let's just say it started as a forced celebration and ended as a bloodbath. And by the end, it was hard to tell which participants were screaming in pain and which in drug-induced ecstasy. The Hutts don't distinguish, after all. When it was finally over, I was trembling head to toe. The plaza was a mess of sand, blood, and limp bodies, but people were cheering like we'd won some great victory. In a way, we had. The victory of surviving another celebration without losing our minds or lives. I stumbled back home after that, peeled off that stupid grin mask, and vomited for a good 10 minutes straight in an alley. Happy anniversary, right? Surviving in a place like this isn't just about avoiding notice. It's also about knowing who to trust, if anyone. You'd think trust would be impossible here, but humans and other sentients are social creatures, even under the thumb of crime lords. Over the years, I've identified a few kindred spirits, fellow survivors, who haven't completely drunk the Hutt-flavored Kool-Aid. We don't have open conversations about how we really feel. That would be suicide. But there are subtle ways we watch out for each other. For example, there's an older human I work with, Garvin. He actually knew my father in the old days. Garvin plays the role of an obedient, half-addled laborer, but I've caught the glint of the old him in his eyes now and then. Once, during a particularly heinous public spectacle, some poor Twi'lek being whipped to release her inner fire, as the announcer put it, I felt myself on the verge of screaming. Garvin accidentally knocked over a crate of spice vials to create a distraction. In the chaos, he whispered to me, "Steady, kid." That simple act kept me from drawing attention. We never spoke of it after, but I nodded to him, and he gave a tiny nod back. In this place, that passes for a heartfelt conversation. There are a couple of others. A neighbor of mine, Sana, a Mirialan woman, is deft at patching wounds and scavenging supplies. She used to be a medical assistant before things fell apart. Now she runs a sort of unofficial clinic in our Hab block's basement, quietly helping those who can't go to the official and woefully sadistic Hutt physicians. She does it under the guise of hosting spice parties, which conveniently keeps the enforcers uninterested or even supportive. Free spice? Why not? Underneath that cover, she's actually disinfecting infections and setting broken bones. I've helped her a few times, fetching water or standing lookout. We don't talk about the old days much. Too painful. But there's a mutual understanding. In a world where true kindness is scarce, even a small act, like sharing a clean bandage, is basically a revolutionary act. We form these small, silent alliances. They're not exactly deep friendships. We all know that if one of us is exposed, the rest might have to distance themselves to survive. It's a sad reality that any of us might crack under pressure and denounce the others to save our own skins. But for now, we help each other in little ways. A warning here, a cover story there, a spare bite of food when someone's starving. It's the closest thing to community we have. Romantic relationships, those are trickier. Jabba's domain is all about lust and possession, but genuine love or trust, that's in short supply. Most pairings these days are transient, opportunistic, or orchestrated as part of palace entertainment. I've kept to myself in that regard, partly out of caution. Giving your heart to someone is just giving the Hutts leverage over you, and partly because, well, I'm not exactly attracted to folks who might turn you in for an extra ration token. I do remember a girl I fancied back in the Republic days, a fellow moisture farmer named Mira. Sweet laugh, kind eyes. She smuggled me extra water rations sometimes when the heat was unbearable. We were young and awkward, never really got beyond shy smiles. Mira's still around, astonishingly. But she's not the girl I remember. Now she's one of Jabba's dancing jewels, a performer in the palace. I saw her during a procession last year. She was wearing a metal bikini and a vacant smile, practically bathing in the cheers and leers of the crowd. We made eye contact for a split second. If she recognized me, She gave no sign. And me? I just looked away. That little spark of what if from our past snuffed out in that moment. Better to let such memories die. Clinging to them just makes the present hurt more. After this grand tour of dread and submission, you might be thinking that your own problems, whatever they are, don't seem so bad in comparison. The Hutt Cartel is sustained by people enduring the unendurable every single day. Our unofficial motto might as well be, "We suffer so that the slugs get fatter." It's grim, it's dark, and it's the reality for countless millions of souls across the Outer Rim territories. From the spice refinery worker coughing up black sand, to the slave dancer performing for bloated crime lords, to the gladiator bleeding out in the arena for entertainment. These thankless existences are the invisible pillars that keep the cartel running, for better or, mostly, worse. In this catalog of nightmare employment, if we had to pick the absolute worst fate of all, some might argue it's reserved for those in the ranker pit-keeper corps. Imagine spending your days feeding sentient beings to a beast, cleaning up its excrement, and knowing that one mistake, one slip, means you're the next meal. But honestly, we're all in the ranker pit. Some of us just haven't been noticed yet. For everyone under Hutt rule, there is no relief, except perhaps the final piece of death, assuming your body isn't recycled for beast feed or your organs sold on the black market. So the next time you groan about your struggles, your hardships, or your daily grind, remember the billions of nameless Outer Rim citizens whose entire lives are spent in toil, terror, and submission. Suddenly, your problems might not seem quite so insurmountable. It could be worse. You could have been born on Tatooine under the twin sun's burning gaze, where every day is a test of survival, and only in death does the Hutt's work truly end. But even then, even in the deepest pit of despair, we endure. We find those tiny moments of defiance, a shared glance with a fellow prisoner, a whispered joke at the expense of our masters, a secret kindness when no one's watching. In these small acts, we prove that the Hutts can take our freedom, our dignity, even our lives. But they can't take everything. Not yet. As long as we remember who we were before the chains, there's something they can never own. And that, however fragile, however foolish, is worth clinging to. The twin suns will rise again tomorrow. The work will continue. The screams will echo from the palace. But I'll still be here, still breathing, still human. And in this hell, that's the only victory that matters.